Thank you very much for that warm welcome, and it's a delight to be back here and to see so many old friends and some new friends, and to be in this building. I was first in this building in, I think it was 1976, attending a service by the Paulsons, Sig and Janie Paulson. And I've been in this particular building for many, many years, both up here and out there. Spent lots of time in here. So the fact that you all are moving over to the what's, I guess it used to be called Silent Unity Chapel, that feels like an important transition. It feels like a significant time in this ministry. Erin McCabe was a student of mine, as was Steve Colliday. And I'm so delighted that Erin is here, and I'm so delighted she's taken some time off, too, because I know she's worked very hard. And so thank you for your presence and your willingness to engage in the spiritual journey of awakening. You are needed. You are needed today, and our message is needed today more than ever. So, this morning I want to say a few words about the topic of guidance. Guidance. I'm going to define guidance in a very general way. I'm going to define guidance as simply knowing what you need to know when you need to know it. Knowing what you need to know when you need to know it. So there's 3 points that I want to make in particular. First point is that guidance is natural. Guidance is natural. It's not supernatural. It's not miraculous. It's quite natural. This physical universe, this universe that we see, the universe that science studies, is but a camouflage for a deeper reality. So there is a deeper reality behind all that we see, hear, taste, smell, and so forth. And in that deeper reality is a deep sense of intelligence. We live in an intelligent universe. We live in a universe that is filled with life. It's alive. It's a universe that's filled with love. It's a universe that's filled with intelligence. We live in a living universe. That's not part of what we learn in science class. This is not part of what we learn in school. And so that's why we're here, to learn it, to share it. Much is misunderstood about the nature of guidance. Some people think of it as I hear it referred to as a divine download sometimes, as like God sending us an email or a text message or something coming from on high. It's not miraculous. It's very natural. It's part of who you are. It's part of what the universe is. Guidance is not limited to a few individuals, although some individuals have developed the capacity for guidance much more than others. But it's available to all of us. It's within each of us. It's inherent in each of us. Guidance can appear in an infinite number of ways. There's no one way it has to occur. Typically, I hear people say, I'm going to meditate to get some guidance. That's good. And that's sometimes a way that opens the door, clarifies, clears the mind. But oftentimes guidance comes when you're driving your car, when you're taking a shower, when you're cleaning the house, when you're doing something very mundane and ordinary, and boom, there it is. Just what we need when we need it. Guidance is embedded in all of life, including your life and mine. And I'd like to tell you a story that was told to me by a very dear friend who passed on some years back. Nancy loved her horse, an Arabian stallion named Taki, beautiful horse. And I would often go riding with Nancy in the Blue Ridge Mountains, beautiful area, riding through the trails in the mountains there. And she was telling me one time when she was riding by herself, and she rode for hours, and she was in bliss, and I could understand why, in the Blue Ridge on the back of a beautiful horse. And she rode all day long, and then it started to get dark, and she started to get hungry, and she realized that she didn't know where she was. So she began to try different paths and could not get her bearing. She tried maybe going up to the top of a hill or a mountain peak somewhere, or a ridge, to look around, and she couldn't seem to find anything. And she got more hungry, more cold, and it got darker. She began to get scared. And the more frightened she was, the more frantic she would ride Taki back and forth and around in circles. Finally, at one point, Nancy got so frustrated, so frightened, she just broke out into tears. She began to sob. And she let go of the reins and just sobbed like a baby. She was scared. She didn't know what was, she may not even survive the night. But after she let go of the tears, the reins, and the tears continued, Taki began to move. And instinctively, she started to grab the reins and stop him. But something told her not to do that. So she just sat. She thought, I'm lost anyway, so why not let go totally? And she did. And so Taki began to walk. And then Taki began to trot. And pretty soon she realized that Taki knew the way home and was taking her home. And when she saw the corral where Taki stayed, she cried again and hugged him for saving her life, so it would seem. And I thought that story was so beautiful because it's such a metaphor for how we live our life, right? We run around trying to find an answer to this and to that and to get something done. And all we need to do is let go of the reins and realize there's something within us that knows the way home. And sometimes we have to just go back and forth and get frustrated enough that we're willing to let go. But whatever it takes, sooner or later, we have the opportunity to realize that our heart knows the way home, if we but trust it. So that's the first point that I want to make, is that guidance is perfectly natural. It's inherent within the universe. A second point is that our capacity as human beings for guidance is evolving. So if we look back many, many, many years, Human beings live primarily by instinct, as do animals and does nature. Animals have guidance. We call it instinct. You know, they know when to fly south, where to fly south, where to go, what stream to come up. You know, it's just absolutely miraculous, so it would seem, with many animals, how they can live. The salmon, for example, will live in the ocean for 5 years and come back to the same stream in which they were born. You know, no GPS or anything like that as far as I know, but they can find their way back. You see. Sea turtles, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all sorts of stories about how nature is deeply involved with intelligence and guidance. We too have instincts. We're born with them. Not instincts as like the animals do, because conditioning kind of overrides our instincts. But we have them nonetheless, and it's important for us to recognize them. But for the most part, in the last several 100,000 years, the human intellect has been the primary way of knowing. Some knowing is by instinct, but most of our knowing is by reasoning. And so that's our gold standard today, is reasoning. You know, if you go to school, you'll learn how to reason. You know, if you're in a court of law, you hear the lawyers appealing to reason. You see. So if we can prove something logically, if it makes sense, then it must be true, you see. So that's the other way. We have evolved from instinct as our primary way of knowing to intellect as our primary way of knowing. And I believe that we are in the process of evolving to another way of knowing. That also starts with I. Instinct, intelligence, and intuition. And I believe that intuition is the next level of knowing for human beings. That someday it will be as common or more common than intellect as the standard by which we measure truth. Doesn't mean that we forget about the intellect, but it means that the intellect is subservient to intuition. Just as it's important that we don't forget about or ignore our instincts, but we don't always want to act on our instincts. We want to act on our intelligence. The day will come, and perhaps today, this day, is for many of us a time when we begin to learn. Intelligence is great, but what does my heart say? You say. So one teacher I've heard said that living contemplatively is living with the mind in the heart. And that's sort of a poetic way of saying that our intellect is given over to the precedence of intuition, you see. And so I think someday that will be our norm. Students in school will be taught how to use their intuition as well as their intellect, you see. And we'll learn to trust that. So as we do that individually, we are creating that cutting edge of evolution that is setting the stage. Now, there can be dysfunctions, just as if we reject our instinct without listening to it, that can create problems if we repress parts of ourselves. And so what happens then is that repressed part of ourselves will contaminate the part that we're trying to exercise. In other words, if we repress our emotions and our instincts, then our intellect, our reasoning gets clouded. And that's what happens today so much of the time. What we call rational thinking is really more like rationalizing. And that's what happens is that the intelligence is used to rationalize something rather than reason it out. So it's really important that we accept the instincts that we have, and it's also important to honor and accept the intellect as well. And then, what does our heart say? What does our intuition say? What does my gut say? What does my mind say? What does my heart say? Listening to all parts of ourselves. So that's the second point. Our capacity for guidance is evolving as a race, as a species. And the third point I want to make is that you can personally increase, develop your capacity for guidance. And I'd like to share with you a few ways that I've learned, because I believe that discerning guidance, listening to it and discerning it is very much a skill. And it takes practice, just like any skill takes practice. And the more we practice, typically the better we get at it. So, questions that sometimes we ask, the questions that I hear, is that, Robert, I have thousands of thoughts and feelings and desires and all sorts of stuff going on up here. How do I know which is guidance? I'll hear a voice. Is it the still small voice? Is it my mother? Is it a priest? Still living back there? How do I discern? So here are some general principles that I'd like to share with you. And again, these are ones that I've learned just in my own life experience. I have not yet encountered a book that will say ABC, here's how you do it. And I think we each need to learn how to do it for ourselves. But I think just asking yourself that question, how do I discern guidance, is very, very important. Authentic guidance is best discerned and understood when you are generally relaxed and at ease and not attached to specific results. So that's one of the things that often get in the way of our guidance, is when we have an attachment to a particular outcome, when we fear something won't happen, or when we are attached to craving something must happen, you see. And sometimes that relaxation only comes about when we're frustrated enough, like Nancy was, to let go of the reins and say, I give up. I surrender. And we've all had that experience of looking for something. And you look and you look and you look and you can't find it. Finally you say, forget it. Boom, okay? So that point of being relaxed and non-attached and yet still having the intention to listen to guidance, very, very helpful. What I have found is that reliable guidance usually does not appear in the form of thoughts or words. It typically appears just as a gentle knowing. It's often called the still small voice, but rarely, in my experience, is it a voice. more just this quiet knowing. I call it a soft knowing. You know, it's not a screaming kind of voice grabbing you. It may be, but most of the time it's more of a gentle whisper. It's much more of an impulse than a compulsion. So if you feel like you're compelled to do something, like something's pushing you and driving you to do it, I would take a look at that. That's usually not spirit guidance, authentic guidance. Because authentic guidance always gives us a choice. You don't have to follow it. You don't have to follow it. You know, the lightning isn't going to strike you if you don't. And sometimes we have to say no. Sometimes we say no for now. Not yet. So, but the important point is that we listen to it. We hear it first. Authentic guidance is never demanding. It never demands that you do something. And yet at the same time, it will be very persistent. It doesn't go away. So you don't need to fear that, if I miss that, the rest of my life is going to be screwed up because I missed that guidance. It'll come back. It'll come back again and again and again. It's like a perennial plant. Keeps returning over and over again. Guidance will come to us when we need it, not necessarily when we want it. Okay? Comes when we need it, not always when we want it. Because oftentimes we want to know what's going to happen next year. I want divine guidance on something that will happen next. Should I do this or should I do that? Nothing. Then all of a sudden that day comes, that hour comes. Boom. I know. Yes, I had an experience like that I had a job offer and deciding whether or not to take it, and I prayed for guidance, and I couldn't get an answer. Finally, the deadline came. I still didn't know. I just took a deep breath. I picked up my phone, started calling the person, and when I picked up the phone, I knew this is not for me. But it didn't tell me until I needed to convey that information, you see. So sometimes it requires us to have some faith, some trust. Trusting the guidance really amplifies it. And I'm not saying trust that a particular answer is always true, but trusting the fact that guidance will reveal itself to you when you need it. Our identification with thinking is probably the greatest obstacle to our experience of guidance, of intuition. Our attachment to the intellect, our attachment to thinking gets in the way. So that's why meditation is so important. In meditation, we hear our thoughts, we see our thoughts, but then we just watch them go by. We look for the space between the thoughts. I often tell students, consider your thoughts like a bird flying through the sky. Oh, there goes one. That's a weird one. So, sometimes that one of them will land on your shoulder. Won't let you go. But don't get attached to the thoughts And as we take our thoughts more lightly, then we begin to listen to the intelligence beyond and between the thoughts. Meditation, even though we don't get guidance always in meditation, but meditation is helpful because it begins to part the clouds, so to speak. It lets us disidentify from the mind and listen to that intuition from the heart. So I'd like to close by saying that guidance is not limited to spiritual issues, whatever spiritual is. We can get guidance around anything. And I mean, it's as mundane as breathing. I'd like to read a couple of quotes. Albert Einstein. All great achievements of science must start from intuitive knowledge. I believe in intuition and inspiration. At times I feel certain I'm right while not knowing the reason why. That's Albert Einstein. And a quote from Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, iPhones, iPads, everything. Steve Jobs said, intuition is a very powerful thing, much more powerful than the intellect. Have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to be. So this is from an accomplished scientist and an accomplished entrepreneur, businessman. Guidance is natural. Our capacity for guidance is evolving. And you can personally, individually develop your own capacity for guidance. So those are the thoughts that I'd like to leave you with, as well as my gratitude for having this opportunity to be here and to share my energy with you all. So thank you. Thank you. So as we take a breath, relax. And just be right where you are, not trying to make anything happen. And just listen. Not listen for words, not listen for anything in particular. Just imagining the heart. Opening. Imagine listening with the heart. Feel the subtle energy that comes to the heart. The quiet knowing. that your heart your being is an intricate part of this universe. That your physical body your mind is but a camouflage for a deeper reality. A deeper reality of what you really are. You are forever connected with infinite intelligence. Has nothing to do with education or IQ or all of our human measures of intelligence. It's the language of the soul. The listening and the knowing. As we rest for a few moments in the silence. In the silence. And so we return to the world of sights and sounds, sensations, and we keep our connection, our awareness to that heart that knows. And so we end our meditation with gratitude. Gratitude for being a part of this universe that is intelligent beyond our human understanding, that is more loving than our human understanding, and is fully alive. And it is within you. It is all within you. So we say amen and amen.